Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Around the Big Ten podcast. I'm Marc Givler, joined by Chip Minnich. As always, we are, a week and a half now into fall camp, into most fall camps. I know different teams kind of start at different times, different days, but we're maybe a third of the way through fall camp now as we get close in on the season here, as we record here on August 8th, 2025. It's funny, our show's around the Big Ten, but the Big Ten Network's been going around the Big Ten here over the past week, making various stops at all the Big Ten programs. And so this week, they were two of the programs they stopped to see were Maryland and Penn State over the past week. Chip, it feels like the Big Ten Network, even, which is, I wouldn't call it like a pure propaganda arm of the league, but it certainly is a friendly station for the Big Ten schools. They're not going to go out of their way to paint anything in a negative light, but even they seem to have some concerns about Maryland. What did you take away from their stop in Maryland to kind of check out Mike Loxley's group?
I like the way you put that. Yeah, I would certainly say that the Big Ten Network, they are trying to be as optimistic and positive about every school that they visit, but they also have, what I really enjoy is for all the different segments, they always have a part where Dave Rebson will be sitting with Jake Butt usually and Jerry DiNardo. It really depends on the episode, but speaking about Maryland, they identified the fact that Maryland, it's going to be possibly a very long season if they cannot figure out what they're doing with their offensive line. Now, I want to emphasize to any Maryland fan out there that is thinking that I'm being negative, and again, Marc, you can obviously speak for yourself. We were both, very pessimistic about Maryland's chances this coming year. At Big Ten Media Days, Maryland was considered one of the, I want to say, in the lower portion of the Big Ten preseason rankings by the media. So this is not something that, again, we're not necessarily piling on per se. But when Jerry DiNardo made a point of looking into the camera and saying that they need to identify the offensive line and get it figured out, because this is just kind of the same old story for Maryland, is that offensively they identified the fact that the wide receiver position, the passing game has always done well. But when it gets into the Big Ten season, specifically in November, the inability to run the ball, the inability to protect their quarterback, they identified, Jake Butt made a point of last season, Billy Edwards Jr. getting sacked repeatedly, that is causing a problem. And so Pep Hamilton, who is now the offensive coordinator, they really emphasized on that episode how Pep Hamilton has previous experience working at Michigan, working at Stanford, the idea of being able to run the ball. I'm kind of in that wait and see mode, but that's kind of what I took away from it, is that, all right, it all starts up front. I mean, the name of the game, say what you will about all of the fancy offenses and defenses, the name of the game always comes down to blocking and tackling. And if you don't have people that can either move, people off the line of scrimmage, or protect them, or get after the opposing team's quarterback, or stop the run, whatever you want to say, it really is going to make for a long season. So Maryland is definitely in that camp of, all right, let's see if you can withstand the upcoming season, because it's going to be a tough one.
Yeah, I'm already was skeptical about even their skill. Right. I'm not convinced their offensive skill is as good this year as it has been the last few years. So if you couple that with offensive line problems, I don't think our worst fears about Maryland's season are that unrealistic. And so we'll see how they piece that together. But yeah, that's a bit alarming that, your kind of your friendly TV network is even pointing out some glaring issues up front. So that'll be something to watch moving forward. As we mentioned before, they were also at Penn State. Different vibe there. A lot of gushing, some real not bold predictions. I don't think it's bold to say Penn State's a Big Ten championship hopeful, but certainly a different vibe at Penn State, and they really seem to enjoy watching Penn State and the depth of talent on that roster.
you hit it right on the head. I mean, like they made a point of, since this is, I guess, the 19th year of the Big Ten Network, in terms of like the training camp visits that they've had. Again, Jerry DiNardo made a point of saying, going back to the very beginning of James Franklin's tenure. They even went back to the idea that, all right, after Joe Paterno left, how the Penn State offensive line, everything that happened in the wake of the Jerry Sandusky scandal, the offensive line was always a weak link on Penn State's various teams. And getting to the point about being so positive, they were gushing about the fact that, okay, the depth, the talent, Jerry DiNardo made a point of looking in saying, okay, they have legitimate tackles, guards, depth across the board. Jake Butt was saying these guys are NFL ready caliber offensive linemen. This is the strength and the foundation of this team. Now, obviously, they talked about the fact that Drew Aller is back, that they have Singleton, Katron Allen at the running back position. They made a point of bringing out Jim Knowles to talk about how he was just augmenting an already strong Penn State defense. So, yeah, it's not anything that you and I or anyone else doesn't believe that Penn State, this is not a new revelation in the sense that Penn State is considered to be a really good team. But to your point about like the friendly neighborhood broadcasting partner being very emphatic in their praise about Penn State, they made a point of saying this team, along with Ohio State, along with Oregon, should be in the thick of discussion for winning the Big Ten and being in the national championship hunt.
Yeah, I think Penn State certainly has the experience. They have the schedule, in my opinion. They do have to play Ohio State and Oregon, but they get one of them. They get Oregon at home, and the rest of the schedule is certainly manageable for them. And so they're a very safe bet, in my opinion, to be in the college football playoff this year. Can the Big Ten, how many can the Big Ten get in will probably be something we debate all year, but it felt last year like as you got to the middle of the season, I was like, yeah, there's going to be 4 Big Ten teams that have a shot, and they all got in. It wasn't like there were that many tough decisions there at the last minute. This could be a year where I actually see that number being like it may be 6 or 7 teams vying for 4 spots versus 4 teams vying for 4 spots. I think there's some other sleeper teams. One of them that I like is Minnesota. And the Kyrell Parish playing both ways thing doesn't appear to be a gimmick or some type of hype thing that we never end up actually seeing. It feels like this is going to be a real thing. Yeah,
Kyrell Parish, speaking of the Big Ten Network, that was one of these things where they identified him. And I will say this much. I mean, like it's not a gimmick. It is one of these things where it was kind of cool to actually see, though, the split jersey. Like with it was he wears a split jersey, and how much time he's going to spend on offense, I think that's debatable. I mean, I'm put me in the camp of that. Yeah, you want to play him both ways, but I would think that he is such a dynamic player in the secondary as well as on special teams that I wouldn't want to necessarily have him out there for every single offensive series. That I would be kind of, this is just me speaking, that the Minnesota coaching staff may want to use him in very specific situations and specific spots. But as a wide receiver, this is not a gimmick. This is PJ Fleck was, he was emphatic about what he loves, which I think most college football fans would agree with, that have seen Kyrell Parish play. He's like, this guy is just a football player. He lives, breathes football 24/7, 365. And I think they want to use him as much as they possibly can, because they know the more that they involve him, the better it's going to be for Minnesota on the field.
I really like this team. If they can get solid, it doesn't have to be great in my opinion, but if they can just get solid, relatively mistake-free quarterback play, their weapons are better this year. They got 2 really good running backs in Darius Taylor and AJ Turner. You got Malachi Coleman transfers in. You're going to play Parrish a little bit to give you some extra juice on offense. Obviously, he's a unbelievable dynamic weapon on defense and special teams. They always seem to piece it together defensively where they're solid. This is a team that could really surprise this year and maybe upset a big dog or two. I think this team's in a really good spot this year. I think they're going to be very tough. Speaking of teams with dynamic safeties, Ohio State, Caleb Downs, returning punts in practice, not playing offense in practice that I've seen. I was at 3 practices for Ohio State's opening week of fall camp. But a lot of different things for Caleb this year. More of a punt return role. It looks like. We'll see. Again, we'll see how this goes. I would imagine against Texas, he's going to be back there to kind of maybe flip a field for him or give him some extra juice back there. He's playing a lot in the slot. He's playing a lot of nickel because they really like their young safety, Jalen McClain. They have more of a veteran guy there, Malik Hartford as well. So you're able to get 3 safeties on the field that way. You have McClain and Hartford back and Downs in the nickel position in the slot. I don't know that he can like really be a Heisman contender, especially on the same team as Jeremiah Smith, who I think is going to steal a lot of the votes from him. But it's setting up for him to like have all these different ways to impact the game. It's going to be fascinating to see how they use him this year, I think.
Oh yeah. Speaking of a guy that's just a phenomenal football player, I mean, Caleb Downs is definitely not that I have any say in the matter, but I would say for any team in the NFL draft that, I know the speculation is always about, like which quarterback is going to be at the top of the boards. If you want a guy that is just going to be a solid player for you in your secondary, barring injury, like you said, being a dependable special teams player, kickoff, kick returner, punt returner, all these different things, possibly even using him on offense, even at the next level. Caleb Downs is I mean, you can't go wrong. And I just think, to your point about the Heisman, I'm going to be in the camp of wait and see about how Ohio State uses Caleb Downs before I necessarily say, that they are jeopardizing his Heisman candidacy. I think that with Matt Patricia now as defensive coordinator, I really do. I think he's kind of like a kid in the candy store that he can't believe his good fortune and is just scheming of different ways. Like you said about he's talented enough to play that in that nickel coverage position. The fact that he returned a punt return for a touchdown last year in a crucial game against Indiana shows, I mean, he's certainly versatile enough and capable enough. So I think Caleb Downs, using him as much as possible, not ignoring the fact that, okay, his primary responsibility is definitely on the secondary side, but if there are some possible opportunities to include him on the offense, I remember Chip Kelly kind of being rumors, supposedly like banging the table, like, hey, Caleb Downs at running back would not be a bad thing. So I'm not saying do it just to do it. I think that there's going to be certain opportunities to kind of get Caleb Downs involved in the offense. So I'm kind of anxious to see if they do that.
Yeah, I think it's going to be I'm not going to speak for Ryan Day, but just knowing Ryan Day, covering him for his entire tenure at Ohio State, I will have to kind of see that to believe it, that they play him on offense, especially given all the receivers they have.
Oh, yeah.
They actually have a deeper receiver room this year than last year, which is kind of hard to believe. But so I kind of – but here's kind of some food for thought, though. Like, if he goes, and this is, again, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but it's not like completely out of the realm of possibility. What if Caleb Downs like returns a punt for a touchdown against Texas and has an interception in that game and they win, they win like a close game and he clearly is the best player on the field? That could catapult him into the discussion, I would think, the national discussion. I would have to think that would do that. If he can if it's not on offense, but it's on special teams even, if he can impact 2/3 of the game in that type of way, that would be an interesting statement to make coming out of the gate.
Certainly. I mean, I know it sounds very cliche, but they always say that your best players always rise to the occasion in the biggest games. And that's not to, I mean, I just mentioned a moment ago that Caleb Downs returned a punt against Indiana for a touchdown, and that kind of helped break the game wide open for Ohio State eventually for Ohio State to pull away from Indiana in that one. Yeah, I mean, I know Ohio State fans are still. I'm not in this category. I know Ohio State fans are still upset about the fact that that's a noon kickoff. That being said, all the eyes of the country, even if it is at noon, are going to be watching that game because it's a 1 versus 2 matchup. And if Caleb Downs, to your point, Mark, has a big play like an interception, has a punt return for a touchdown, does enough to necessarily be, hey, it was because of Caleb Downs that Ohio State was able to defeat Texas in the season opener. Absolutely. His name will be one of these guys that, even though he's primarily a defensive player, that his name will start to get mentioned in the Heisman Trophy candidacy.
Yeah. So that'll be an interesting storyline to follow in terms of this particular Ohio State team, given, you know, all that star power on offense, but they do have this guy on defense. Last thing on Ohio State, huge bullet dodged. Edric Houston went down early, or late in one of the early practices for the Buckeyes. I was there. He was helped off the field. His knee had kind of buckled in a drill, and that's never good. It wasn't really a direct contact injury, so you're always like fearing the worst there. He's going to be fine. He's been jogging. He's going to be back in practice probably this week. So crisis averted there, because I think if there's one thing, particularly on defense, I think everyone figures Ohio State's secondary is going to be really good, and everyone figures they're pretty set at linebacker. But I think defensive tackle depth is like the one thing that like Ohio State fans are kind of concerned about right now with that defense. And I think Edric Houston's going to be one of the best ones in the conference this year. That would have been quite a blow. So sometimes it's those little breaks that can those, you know, good fortune. So we wish him and everyone out there who's practicing this month good health. We hate to see injuries for anybody. So that was a little bullet dodge there. Chip, did your blood pressure come down?
Yeah, it came down. Yeah, I appreciate your concern, but yeah, I guess it's more of, I mean, because correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, it was one, like you said, one of the early practices, if not the very first one. And I guess it's more of a question I have is I know that they didn't have pads on yet. I know they're in pads now. Yeah. But the question I have is, I just generally presumed that both the offensive and defensive linemen were braces to, you know, like just to kind of mitigate against any possible injury. And I realized this was, again, it was a non-contact. It wasn't as though, you know, somebody
he was grappling with somebody, right, but it wasn't
right,
like nothing actually hit his knee. His knee
correct,
just kind of buckled.
Yep. Right. So I guess, you know, like that would be the one thing that I would just kind of, I guess, request, you know, as a fan is like, okay,
every
like,
defensive lineman that be watching this would be like cursing you right now, though. They don't want those braces.
I know they don't.
You need to be flexible. You need to bend, burst, all that stuff. Those braces, man, they are not.
Oh, I know.
Defensive linemen.
I completely understand that, but it's one of those things where it's like, just to, you know, like you said, I mean, it's a very precarious depth situation for Ohio State. You know, and just to kind of, you know, the point I would be making is that not only is it a depth situation, but the fact that he's along the interior, you know, to your point, which I completely agree with. Yeah, they need to be able to bend, but you know, like his primary, even though he was an outstanding, you know, better than most, you know, when on the recruiting side of things, he was an outstanding pass rusher, but his move into the interior speaks to, okay, yeah, we value your pass rushing, but guess what? We value your tenacity and ability to be a plugger in the middle. And I would just think that, okay, that kind of necessitates he and Caden McDonald, you know, like we need you guys to stay healthy. So if that means wearing braces and maybe kind of losing some of that explosive pass rush, we'll take that if that means we're going to keep you healthy. But that's just the fan in me speaking.
Yeah. Understandable. So we've talked about Penn State's offensive line. Certainly Ohio State thinks they have a very good offensive line. But Dylan Raiola, Nebraska quarterback, thinks it's the Nebraska offensive line that's going to win the Joe Moore Award. Chip, what was your reaction to that? I mean, look, you want your quarterback saying good things about your linemen. Mm-hmm. Is that realistic?
I'm gonna mark that down as to be determined. Dylan Raiola, I mean, the kind of the gist of when he said that, he was singing the praises of his offensive line. He certainly looks like he is, not that he was in horrible shape, but I would just say that he is certainly slimmed down. He is definitely, in terms of, for his sophomore year. And, the fact that, I think the expectation among the Nebraska fans and the coaches is that Dylan Raiola is going to take that next step. The fact that he was a freshman starter, he's a sophomore, leader of the team. They could not speak enough positive things about the relationship that he is building and has developed with Dana Holgorsen as the offensive coordinator, and the improvement over the last portion of the season last year with Dana Holgorsen being involved in the Nebraska offense, that they've had a whole offseason to work and develop some better things. But getting back to the offensive line, I'm going to mark it down as to be determined. I know that you and I are of a similar mindset. Nebraska is one of those teams that could possibly be in that sleeper position to, be in the college football playoff discussion, because they get Michigan coming to Lincoln. They get USC. So it's these kind of games where, all right, the Nebraska faithful, I know that they've been certainly waiting for the glory days to return. I'm not suggesting that it's going to, but speaking of the friendly neighborhood Big Ten Network, they made a point of saying, okay, year 3 of Matt Rule, it's usually where the big jump into prominence usually takes place. Dave Rebson said, "Hey, coach," on camera, he said, "Coach, by my reckoning, like you might be looking at a 10 or 11 win season if year 3 tradition under Matt Rule stays true to form." Matt Rule didn't take the bait, but I'm just saying that I think Nebraska, they certainly have the potential to have a better season than I think a lot of the college football world is giving them credit for.
It's my favorite play week 1 so far, which I haven't done anything yet, because to do that, I just refuse to do it. God bless those who do, but to put anything down on a game 3.5 weeks out, with training, a training camp injury could shift a line so far in one direction. I wait till week of, but I think Nebraska is going to beat the brakes off of Cincinnati when they play in Kansas City week 1.
I agree with you.
6.5 was like a gift, I thought. Now it's 7. So I'm going to sit here and wait, and it's going to be like 9.5 at kickoff. I'm going to be furious. But it's that I think they are going to destroy Cincinnati coming out of the gates. And then we'll see if that kind of ramps them up, the rest of the way. But to your point, Raiola, taking his conditioning seriously this offseason is huge on multiple levels. One, it shows an awareness, a maturity, whatever, a willingness to work. But I thought that was a problem last year, both mentally and physically. I thought he wore down late in the season, and that's why we saw him not play his best football later in the season. It's a tough grind for a true freshman to go through, and I thought he got just wore down a little bit as the season went on. So to see him come back and kind of self-scout that and be like, yeah, I need to be in better shape and all that stuff, I think that's a very positive development for Nebraska fans, and I'm sure Matt Rule's very happy with that as well. So I'm with you. I think that's a team that could surprise this year, and they seem to have a lot of the games you'd want to have at home. They have those. So that'll be interesting as well. Two quick
points about Nebraska. We talked about avoiding injury, and unfortunately, I guess some news to report. Nebraska tight end Mac Markway, injured his ACL, so he is out. So that's something that, obviously impacts the Nebraska offense. But again, to your point, I think Raiola's maturity and emergence as a leader on camera with the Big Ten Network, they were saying, he certainly, this is his team. So everyone's excited. And the second point that I wanted to make about the season opener, I saw this on social media earlier today. I believe it was Mitch Sherman pointed out that, okay, this is technically a neutral site game in Kansas City. And I will just say, I am not a big fan of neutral site games. I believe that games should be held, on campus, at the schools. That being said, Nebraska fans have bought up those tickets. It's like a 10 to 1, in terms. So I think, to your points, which I wholeheartedly agree with, I think Nebraska is not only going to show up and dominate, but I think they're going to have all of their fans there. The fact that it's a Thursday night game, national television, it's going to be it's going to be a tremendous way to probably kick off the season for Nebraska.
Yeah, it's going to be a glorified home game. I mean, it's going to be. Nebraska's going to be at least 80-20 in that crowd, at least.
Yep.
So with that, and just as long as they're healthy going into that, the talent, I think they have a coaching advantage in that game. I don't see that being a very good night for Cincinnati, but we'll see.
No.
I've provided the bulletin board material, so we'll see.
You and I both. I don't want you to be the only one that gets the barbs. So
Matt Rule, if he's watching this, is like, no, please stop.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I that's the game I looked at week 1. I'm like, that's a good one. That's one I like. But yeah, so that's probably about it for today. Again, I reiterate, I do this like every week, it feels like, but I reiterate that the buzz coming out of Washington right now about Damon Williams, their quarterback, their young quarterback, is very positive right now. When you couple that with, year 2 of Jed Fish, they've got the stud running back, Jonah Coleman, they got the stud receiver, Denzel Boston. It feels like a bounce back. I think we need, regardless of what happens in the Ohio State versus Texas game, I think we need to start circling that Washington-Ohio State game late September. I think that's going to be a bigger game than people think.
Yeah, this is just me. I'm just kind of surprised that for all of the angst and hand-wringing and, rending of garments, whatever kind of, negative term you want to think of, that when it comes to like Fox Big Noon kickoffs, that I'm surprised that CBS has not jumped on that game and really started, publicizing it. I recognize the fact that, like in terms of like, it's usually like the 10-day window and things like that. But I think that game is going to be big time marquee, because we already know Oregon at Penn State's the NBC night game. So we also know that since Washington is, on the West Coast, they're never going to be a noon kickoff. So I'm just kind of surprised CBS. But that being said, getting back to the main point of this discussion, Washington, you and we have made no secret of being on the bandwagon, and I think it's going to shape up to that's going to be a big time game because, more than likely Washington will be undefeated. Ohio State could be undefeated depending on how they do in week 1. So it should be a
one-loss team at number 5 or something. Like they're not the loser of that Texas-Ohio State game, unless it's a total blowout, which would be shocking.
Which I can't imagine it would be.
Isn't going to fall very far, I don't think. But that is a chance to be a really good game. I think it will be. I think it'll be an important game in the Big Ten race. I really do. So we will see how that goes. Chip, any parting thoughts? We got another week of camps here, or of a fall camp coming up.
Yeah.
So we'll be back here. We'll get back with you guys here probably middle of next week to jump back into things, what we've seen, what we've heard, what we've watched on Big Ten Network's coverage, everything else. See what the big stories are around the conference. But any parting thoughts on this week before we sign off?
Just like you said, one more week, hopefully injury-free. And looking forward to kind of, finding out how the teams around the Big Ten are shaping up.
And it's just 2 more Saturdays, right?
That's
without
right.
college football.
That's
right.
You
get that week 0 coming up here, and so just 2 more Saturdays without college football. So it's really just tomorrow's Saturday. So it's really we're just like 24 hours away. It'll just be 1 more Saturday. So we're getting close. So it's an exciting time of year. Thanks everyone for watching, listening. Check out all the stuff. We've had we've had press conferences up on the YouTube channel at youtube.com / at Saturday Glory. We've had some stuff from Bill Belichick, Ryan Day, Hugh Freeze. We've gotten several press conferences up where Garrett Seawright's doing a great job going around the country and kind of going around and tackling some of the big storylines around college football. So make sure you're checking out the other stuff on the channel as well. But thanks everyone again for supporting us, watching, listening, and we will talk to you again soon.